So maybe we should go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. I'm assuming a few more people will be joining us, but I'll get this going. Kevin, can you start the first slide? And just to give you some ideas I'm going to be showing some pictures while there we go, while we're talking, but just in case you don't know, if you want to adjust the size of the screen share so you can make the people tiles a little bigger, most of my pictures are going to be more like background, and you can put your cursor right between the set of people and the picture and click on it and drag to the right or left just to adjust things to make it any way you want, just to make yourself comfortable. And I'll go ahead and get started. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of a workshop with South Central Yearly Meeting. I was here in the yearly meeting in 2017 to talk about Standing Rock on a plenary panel with Gerald Jimmy and Cheryl Angel. And it's wonderful to be back to see some folks that I met when I was here then, some people I know, and to get to know some new people. It was great to be here then. When I visit yearly meetings, I often get asked to deliver a message of inspiration and empowerment about climate change and ecological collapse. And for most of us, thinking about climate change and ecological collapse results in a sense of devastation and despair. You know, it's nearly impossible to deliver a message of hope and inspiration. So, you know, to many of these issues feel overwhelming, but for most of my life, I have embraced the impossible. My personal motto is make the impossible feasible and the feasible inevitable. So when I get asked to do the impossible, I usually say yes. So Kevin, can we see the next number 2? And I almost forgot to introduce myself. My name is Shelly Tanenbaum. I'm the General Secretary for Quaker Earth Care Witness. I live in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area, the ancestral and current home of the Ohlone people. And I am, as I said before, very delighted to be here with you in South Central Yearly Meeting. So almost all of you have done this, make the impossible feasible and the feasible inevitable at some point in your life. That's what being a friend calls us to do, to take on what seems to be an impossible challenge because it's the right thing to do. So whether you've spent time in your life working on social justice or opposition to war, or caring for earth and environmental justice, defunding the police, Black Lives Matter, water is life, or maybe building a community garden, any number of causes, I just want to say thank you, to acknowledge that this is hard but very good work. We're not done here, but thank you for stretching and for dreaming and for working into being what seemed impossible at some point. I want to start with a story of resilience that comes from the Redwood Forest. And by the way, I'm going to talk for a bit, and we will definitely have time for folks to share reflections and ask questions. So there will be plenty of time for that. I want to tell you a story that comes from the Redwood Forest, which is one of my favorite places on Earth. We have a lot to learn from the way nature works. She's had a long time to figure things out, while we modern humans have only been around for a couple 100,000 years. Redwood trees mean a lot to me. The forests speak to me. They calm me down. They inspire me. This is what the area where I live. Kevin, can we have slide 3, please? Redwood forests have evolved to not just cope with frequent fires, but to thrive as a result of fire. These forests do well if every about 10 to 20 years, a small fire runs through and clears the underbrush and some of the dense new growth. Nearly all the mature trees not only survive these fires, but are triggered to release new seedlings. The redwood ecosystem figured out how to build a thriving forest despite frequent natural fires. So this picture shows what happens after a fire. You could see the scorched tree in the background and the new shoots coming up. So after the devastating fires in Northern California in 2020, some of the redwood forests are showing signs of resilience and regrowth. This picture was taken at Ben Lomond Quaker Center in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and half of the land at Ben Lomond Quaker Center was burned. It's coming back. This first picture shows redwood shoots coming up just about 2 months after the 2020 fire. Let's go to the next slide. This year, this is the second spring after the fire. It's clear that nearly all of the mature trees are still alive. Most are showing scorch marks at their base, but the understory is mostly absent. The picture on the left shows an area that burned, and you can see the understory is pretty bare. It's coming back, but it's pretty bare. The picture on the right is an area of the redwood forest near Ben Lomond Quaker Center that didn't burn at all. Let's go to slide 5. But nature is maybe running out of resilience in today's changing climate. Some of the mature redwood trees in Sequoia National Park were still smoldering nearly a year after the fires. Redwoods can live a very long time. When they get to be over 1,000 years old, they're called monarch trees. The National Park Service estimates that as many as 10% of the monarch trees in Sequoia National Park have been lost forever. And this is one of those lost monarchs. Some of these areas will never be redwood forests again due to long-term drought and misguided forestry practices that discouraged small controlled burns. These fires are burning hotter and longer, and redwood forests may not have enough time to figure this one out. They're not likely to be able to adapt. So one small ray of hope is that forestry is changing. It's drawing on indigenous practices that served for thousands of years to reintroduce small controlled burns. So we may yet save some of these magnificent forests. And this is just one example, very close to my heart, but it's only one example of what's happening globally. We are in unprecedented times, ecologically and socially. These are times of transition and struggle. These kinds of times are hard times, and hard times are nearly always worse for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Slide 6, please. But times of transition are also opportunities to change. My work with Quaker Earth Care Witness is all about making that change. We work to create a world that thrives in ecological integrity and embraces environmental justice. These are the two of the goals that we lift up in QEW. These are not two separate concepts. Ecology and justice are interlinked. Environmental justice is what has allowed so much of our world to be degraded. This happens when we designate certain parts of the landscape and certain people as, quote, sacrifice zones, places where it's seemingly okay to dump toxic sludge or release asthma-inducing particles in the air or to leave behind uranium tailings. Pollution, climate change, and land degradation, these affect all of us, but some people in some places feel the effects more severely, and they have fewer resources to escape these situations. So slide 7, please. So we've seen this over and over again. A massive storm or fire causes evacuation, destruction, danger. It's hard for everyone in the path of a storm or fire, but some people have the resources to rebuild thanks to good insurance. They have the means to flee and afford places to stay. They have the time to reconstruct their lives. Others have no car to load up with their stuff and no place to go. There's pain for all involved, but for some, it is much more than for others. We experienced a very graphic and tragic example of the devastation that climate-induced hurricanes can do in the aftermath of Katrina in 2005. That's where this picture comes from. Since then, we've seen more frequent and more intense extreme weather events, most of which are fueled by climate change, which in turn is primarily linked to the use of fossil fuels. And almost always, the environmental impacts from the use of fossil fuels more severely affects Black, Indigenous, and people of color, whether these impacts are linked to extreme weather, refineries in poor communities, or air pollution from gas-powered cars and trucks. Next slide, please. So here is an example from 2016. To transport fossil fuels, suppose a pipeline is proposed to run close to a community. Okay, people in the community, mostly white, some with connections to decision makers, they don't want to see this pipeline leak in their community, so they lobby to have the pipeline moved. It gets moved to run through contested Indigenous land. And this is exactly what happened with the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota. It's running through Lakota Sioux ancestral burial grounds. And it's nearly the same story. I'm using this as an example. It's nearly the same story with pipeline after pipeline. The picture you're seeing is Osheti Sakawi, the activist camp at Standing Rock in 2016, when I went there with 2 other QEW steering committee members and thousands of others to support the water protectors. So for several years, we've seen resistance to pipelines that often traverse through some of the poorest regions in the country. Sometimes the resistance has been successful. Presidents Obama and Biden canceled the international Keystone XL pipeline. Next slide. This past year, resistance to reroute line 3 of a pipeline running through Minnesota was growing. The rebuilt pipeline doubles the flow of tar sands oil and reroutes about half of the line through Indigenous wild rice growing lands. Many of the Anishinaabe people living on the land put out a call for others to join them, and several friends were part of the resistance this past year. We were inspired by Indigenous leaders, mostly women, who joined camps strung along the line to resist the construction. Some of these camps are still open and they're monitoring the flow of tar sands. The pipeline is now operational. So this slide and the next one were taken by Taryn Takimoto and Karen and Marianne Percy from Bellingham, Washington, and I joined together and went up and spent about a week up on line 3 at the Red Lake Treaty Camp. Seeing some people as less worthy allows environmental degradation to happen. It's both wrong and wrong-headed, as such actions lead to ecological catastrophe and massive human suffering. Can we see the next slide, please? This is what the Red Lake River looks like. And we woke up to this scene. We had our tents strung out along the river at Red Lake Treaty Camp. And every morning, this is the beauty that we saw there. Next slide. Yeah, and this is Karen on the left and Marianne on the right. And in the middle is Daniel Luckmucker, who's a friend from Illinois Early Meeting, who spent a couple of months at Red Lake Treaty Camp working mostly on day-to-day operations. It's hard not to jump from one effort of resistance to the other. I mean, they're all compelling, right? And for some of us, direct action is part of our calling, our witness in the world. I hardly traveled anywhere over the past 2 years due to COVID, but this was one of the 2 trips I took to go out to Red Lake. The other was to take care of my ailing father-in-law. We also need to confront the overall pattern of environmental injustice and work towards systemic change. Next slide, please. So to put our ecological situation in perspective, I want to share just a few statistics about these times that we're living in. I promise you, very short, but it's important to kind of put where we're at right now ecologically in context. The last time there was this much carbon in the atmosphere was 4 million years ago. This was long before Homo sapiens and even before early humans. At the time, it resulted in a much warmer planet by 4 degrees C and much higher sea levels by about 50 feet. Our planet hasn't yet adjusted to the current atmospheric carbon. We don't know exactly where Earth is headed, whether the planet will revert to what it was 4 million years ago or something else. We do know that we can expect increasing extreme weather. That means long-term drought in the West and in much of Africa and Australia. It means more flooding in the middle of the US and the East, as well as in India and South Asia. It means rising sea levels that particularly impact low-lying areas such as Florida, the Carolinas, the Gulf Coast in the US, and in other countries such as Bangladesh. This will happen. How bad it gets depends on 2 things. How much do we care for those people who are most severely affected by extreme weather? And how quickly we can stop using fossil fuels and releasing excessive greenhouse gases. So, I mean, we're at an exciting time. We can make an enormous difference. Our energy production right now is shifting to 100% renewable. Power technology has advanced faster than anybody has predicted. I have a background in energy technology, and what's happening right now is amazing, absolutely amazing, and being implemented faster than anyone thought was possible. Currently, building new solar and wind energy capacity are the least expensive options for new energy sources. The International Energy Agency, which is known as a conservative research group, now says we should not be building any more fossil fuel infrastructure. The transition to using cleaner energy and living more simply, it needs to be done, and needs to be done equitably. Scientists say that what happens in the next couple of years will determine the fate of future generations. So we have the means to do it. We need to do it well. And that means including environmental justice every step of the way. Income disparity plays a role in all of this. And most of the statisticians, they argue about this or that piece of this, but they pretty much tend to agree that up to half of the total global carbon emissions come from just the top 10% of income earners. So there's a pattern here, whether it's one group of people dominating another group or our human population dominating the planet. We're sorely in need of a different way to live on this planet and a different way to relate to each other. Spiritually, I think we're called to do this work. And ecologically, as a scientist, I think that we have no other choice if we are to survive with a healthy ecosystem that equitably supports all of us as well as other species. Can we have the next slide, please? I take a lot of inspiration from nature, as you've heard from my story about redwood forests, and also from some amazing people in our world today. One of my inspirations and guides is Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a Potawatomi, she's a poet, she's a botany professor, she's a mother and a public speaker. Her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, is especially illuminating if you want to understand eco-spirituality and environmental justice. I strongly recommend reading this book if you haven't already done so. And Robin tells us, I want to live in a society where the currency of exchange is gratitude and the infinitely renewable resource of kindness, which multiplies every time it is shared, rather than depreciating with use. So I'm going to share a little bit about what I've learned from Robin, and then we'll have some time to take some reflections from all of you. Kevin, can we have the next slide? This is a poem that pretty much speaks what's in my heart. Even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights the whole sky. So I feel let's cultivate the awe and gratitude for the gifts of nature and the gifts that each of us gives to each other. Then we'll know what we're called to do. Imagine if we construct our society in a way that mimics a natural ecosystem. In nature, there are symbiotic relationships between animals and plants, between animals and plants and the local climate. The sun gives light. The carbon cycle provides oxygen and CO2. The water cycle provides rain, snow, rivers. Animals eat each other and plants, but not too much. There's a balance to keep it all in sync, and we all thrive. The plants that grow are in tune with the weather. So can we bring back that sense of awe and gratitude for the balance of nature, for reciprocity with each other and our plant and animal relations, to recreate a different way of living in the world? These are definitely interesting times. Can we have the next slide? Environmental justice is a key part of embracing that reciprocity. I can't say this any better than Hop Hopkins, the director of organizational transformation for the Sierra Club. And in the aftermath of the George Floyd killings, he wrote an article called "Racism is Killing the Planet." He says, if our society valued all people's lives equally, there wouldn't be any sacrifice zones to put the pollution in. If every place was sacred, there wouldn't be a cancer alley. We would find other ways to advance science and create shared wealth without poisoning anyone. We would find a way to share equally both the benefits and the burdens of prosperity. So when I envision the kind of world that I would like to live in, a key part is that we would eliminate sacrifice zones. And just imagine a world where there is no othering. Next slide, please. So when I think of how to answer the question, what can I do? What can I do? What can we all do? My first suggestion is to look around my community or community to see what is already being done to address ecological collapse and environmental justice. So in nearly every region, there are already good people and good organizations that could use your help. So even better, look for organizations that are led by people of color, organizations that make it clear that environmental justice is a central part of their efforts. So my short list of what I focus on is the following things. One, a transition to fossil fuels to renewable energy as quickly and equitably as possible. Two, to preserve and enlarge wildlife habitat. And I don't mean tree plantations, I mean forests. To eat more veggies and less meat, and to reduce our use of plastics. And in all of these things, I look at it through the lens of environmental justice to see where, what is equitable and what is fair. Many friends are already working to create a better way of living on the earth and with each other. Friends are doing this work out of a sense of a spiritual calling, that we're one, that we're connected. So when I hear their stories, it brings me a lot of joy. When I feel that connection, that sense of oneness with nature, with each other, I get a sense of love and peace and harmony. And I know it sounds a little silly, but when I go for walks in these hills, this is what it looks like where I live. These hills are full of bay trees and oaks and redwoods. Makes me happy. I'm smiling just looking at this picture. So maybe this is how we turn the impossible into the inevitable, by living that connection with nature and with each other. So I'm going to share a link in the chat, if I can get to it, that will show you, give you a sample of our newsletter and how to sign up for it. Because what we do in Quaker Earth Care Witnesses newsletter is we share stories of what friends are doing and help them help you see what else is going on in the world, to see what inspires you, what is similar to what you're doing and what you could share with us. I'm also going to share a link that has a list of speakers who could come to your meeting and talk about just the way I'm talking to you right now. We have 11 of us who are happy to come to meetings to give talks like this. There's a whole range of topics, and we're happy to come to you. So at this point, I'd love to hear from you. I have a question for you I'd like you to think about, and then just open up the floor. We can maybe have a few minutes of worship together, and then share our thoughts about this. Kevin, can we have the last slide? So I'm going to ask you to describe a situation when you have directly experienced environmental injustice, when you felt like it was happening to you, or you have worked to change this kind of situation, or you have heard about people living in sacrifice zones. What did you do, and how did you feel about this? And what was the outcome? So I've already shared with you my examples of witnessing and supporting water protectors at Standing Rock and on Line 3. And I've mentioned the disproportionate impacts of extreme weather on different groups of people, such as the aftermath of Katrina. So those are kind of examples of what I'm talking about. So I'd love to hear from all of you what you're feeling about this, what you've experienced, and we'll just open this up for discussion. I don't think we need to look at this question anymore. Do you want me to put this question in the chat, or is it pretty clear? It's probably pretty clear at this point. So why don't we go ahead and spend a little bit of worship, and please speak out of the worship if you have an experience or something you'd like to share about environmental justice and what it has meant for you and where you would like to take that.
One of my biggest service projects locally is working with a local food pantry. And I'm always astounded and frequently distressed at the number of things that grocery stores feel it necessary to get rid of and grateful that at least we can sometimes pass them on to other people by using volunteer labor to essentially glean those things. Because they come from grocery stores, we don't ever get bulk foods. All we do is get packaged foods. And as a consequence, since I sometimes take some of the food home too, I'm throwing out a lot more plastic. And for me personally, what I've decided is that if I have to buy something that's packaged in plastic, I have to think long and hard if it's worth it to do it, considering the amount of plastic I personally am responsible for disposing of. Although, of course, I know if I didn't, someone else would either take it or it'd end up in the landfill anyway. It's not, at that point, at the point of purchase, there are fewer decisions to be made in some ways. If you're, unless you're going to figure out a way to get further up the supply chain to the farms or to the gardens or whatever. But because I was raised in the tropics and love the oceans, I'm devastated by the damage that the oceans are receiving, in part from acidification and so forth, but in large part from plastics. And it's an onion. Even if you can maybe peel off a piece of it, there's always some other terrible thing underneath it seems so far, except for, as I've forgotten her name already, said, that it's the love and gratitude and sharing that holds us together and really is our only hope, I guess.
I was raised on a wheat and cattle farm in north central Oklahoma. And growing up, we also had sheep and chickens and turkeys. We were much more varied farm than it is now. It's much more of a corporate farm, not owned by a corporation, but a monocultured farm now. And about 20 years ago, I woke up about what was happening on the planet and decided to move back to the farm and start a retreat center. And it was a center for sustainability and spirituality and healing, with Earth doing the healing. And my sister and I ran it in our family farm for 10 years. And one year I was involved in the Keystone Pipeline protest here in Oklahoma. We had a camp, direct action camp for a week. But we didn't succeed in Oklahoma. The pipeline was built and oil is flowing through it. And the other thing that happened was people kept saying, "We're so glad you're up here doing this. It makes us feel good." And I'm thinking, this is not going to cut it. It can't just be us up here doing it. And eventually I moved to Oklahoma City, into an urban farm right in the heart of Oklahoma City. It's about a mile from downtown Oklahoma City. And we have 4 lots that are a composting operation and vegetable and pollinator plants and cut flowers. We do a lot of education. Twice a month we have a garden school. And we're an incubator for some farmers who are just getting started. So I've said this has saved my soul, because I got so frustrated at the retreat center. people loved being out on the prairie, and they would walk and discover dung beetles and all sorts of wondrous things in nature, but it didn't seem to change behavior very much. But here in the middle of Oklahoma City on this farm, which has been here about 12 years now, it's really reached the point at which we have lots of volunteers and lots of really dedicated young people. And they're serious. I mean, they sort garbage every week. And they've developed a community. It is a community, even though not everybody lives here. It's not all a geographic community, but we grow fruit in our front yards and are a model for how we think it's good to live and grow some of your food at least and feed the bees and the monarchs. So I have more hope. I don't know if we'll do it in time, but with the young people involved, I really am excited for the future. While I'm also devastated on some days. But.
I can add just a little bit to what Pat was talking about. It's easy to get discouraged. You hear about pipeline resistance that didn't work, that the pipeline's flowing like Dakota Access Pipeline, but the Dakota Access Pipeline water protectors inspired so many other resistance camps, and they have been partially successful. I don't know that those camps would have risen up if what happened at Oshedi for those that year or so that people were there hadn't happened. So, you know, when we look at historically what has happened with pipeline resistance, we'll see that there was actually significant change that happened, even if some pipelines were canceled, some never got going, and others are flowing. So I just want to add a little to that to not be too discouraged. I think a lot was changed through those resistance camps and is ongoing. Thanks, Pat.
I grew up in Houston, and the fossil fuel industry is very big there. My sister raised her 3 girls in Pasadena and Deer Park on the east side, where there are a lot of refineries and chemical plants. And this is a working class area, all working class. And my sister would get phone calls at work from her kids' school saying, you need to come pick up your kids because we're evacuating. There's been a chemical release or a fire or an explosion somewhere. And this would happen, you know, a few times every year. And one of my nieces has severe asthma, and the rates of asthma in this area are a lot higher than other places. And the EPA has certain rules that basically will allow chemical companies to release toxic chemicals if they trade with another company that's not going to do it, or something like that. And solutions I see are to not allow these kind of releases into our environment at all. And eventually, as we become hopefully less and less and less dependent on fossil fuels, we won't have these refineries at all.
Thanks for sharing that story. I think you bring up a really important concern. The use of offsets, or if one community is, if a company is allowed to make releases in one community because they're trading with another company or another division of their own to clean up the air somewhere else. But what does that mean for that community that is constantly being inundated with toxic emissions? So thanks for bringing that up. We have a similar situation next door to where I live in Richmond, California, which is the home of the Chevron refinery. And there's, just about every year, there's some major event that happens and that people are told to shelter in place. And that community is exposed over and over and over. Thanks for bringing that up, Paula. Dale, it's nice to see you. Dale and I have known each other for several years through Quaker Institute for the Future. It's good to see you again. And he hosted me when I was at South Central those many years ago.
Charlie told me to tell you hi a little while ago.
You've been talking to my husband when I haven't been. My husband's currently in Michigan taking care of his parents' house. His father passed away last year, and there's all kinds of aftermath to that to deal with.
Well, I'm sorry I came in so late, and I really wanted to hear this, so I missed a lot, but this is a subject very dear to my heart. And I feel like I experience environmental injustice every day just by seeing the unconsciousness of people throwing things on the street, like plastic bottles, cans. I think, it's such a beautiful earth, and then people just throw these things and they have no awareness somehow. And I live in an apartment complex in Austin, and we have, communal recycling and trash. And I'm amazed at how many people throw the recycling in plastic bags. That still takes 100 or however many years to decompose. So to me, it's a matter of education, just in little ways, even the smallest ways, are each person. Like, I'm very outspoken when I see something like this, because people honestly don't know. Sometimes they just need to be prodded and told what they're doing. And one way that I do this is Facebook. And, Facebook gets a bad rap and everything, but it is a place where you can have your voice heard. And every now and again, I speak up about, you can use compostable bags instead of plastic bags to put your trash in. And I understand that that's, not everybody can do that. It costs more, but more than that, they're not strong enough to hold, a lot of people's waste, or a big family. So the plastic bag thing for trash is big for me. And I'm always wondering, what can I do about that to make a change? So I have that question. Thank you for listening.
I wanted to share a story that I have that's a little personal. It's not about a corporation attacking me or anything like that. But as a even more young adult, I was able to move to a location that was basically East Texas, and I was dealing with pretty profound poverty, and I moved into an area that I could afford, so everyone else was dealing with very similar situations. And it was a small little neighborhood that we all lived in, but unfortunately there was no trash service. And while that doesn't seem like a massive deal, but when you can barely keep food on your table, being able to get rid of your trash is pretty important. And when the only solution you're given is like, hey, here's a trash barrel, go burn your trash. And that's what everybody does. And that's just what you do to get rid of your trash. It's not great. It's not a great option. It's not a great solution, but when you can't afford another option, it's what you do. Coming days later, after I would get done burning the trash, I didn't think anything of it, but it'd be like coughing up mucus that's in black sheets. Like, I don't know what the long-term effects will be on my body. I have a little bit of asthma now, but I don't know yet what that kind of thing will lead for my body. But while I was there, I tried to reduce how many single-use things I could get. I tried to compost. I tried to garden as much as I could, but there's some limitations. You have, like, especially I lived about 30 minutes from town. The only place was Walmart. I had to buy it. Just seeing, when I see things as the, what do they call them? Grocery pair, when you don't have access to a grocery store, I forgot what that's called, but the term, I assumed that was in the inner city only, but that's also being out in
grocery deserts.
Yeah, grocery deserts. Like, I associated that with being in the city, and that is a thing. But also, when you're in the middle of nowhere, the closest grocery store being a family dollar that has no fresh produce, nothing real except for boxed canned things, which you can't buy in bulk, which you can't reduce your footprint. Like, you're just stuck with that, and that's the only option you have. Or going to Walmart, and that's still not a great option, but it's again what you have. So just wanted to share my story. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks, Heather. I think you both are bringing up something that I sort of touched on, but I didn't really go into much detail, which is that there are lots of examples of environmental injustice, of environmental degradation. And sometimes we can individually or in our household come up with something to do about it, but that's not really, I mean, that's a good thing. We Friends really honor wanting to live in integrity with our values. But what's truly needed is systemic change to make it accessible for everyone, not just people who can afford to buy a better bag or can cart their trash to a better place to take it rather than burning it up and polluting the air. Your community needed together to find a way to have trash pickup or have some alternative that would make sense and that everybody could actually use. Rather than the only alternative to be basically to burn your stuff because you couldn't afford to take it anywhere or you didn't have time to take it anywhere. So to me, it's important to live in integrity as much as I possibly can, but that isn't the end of it. And simultaneously, I can't wait till I'm so pure that I can then expect other people to do it, but to simultaneously work in our communities to make those systemic changes so that whatever we're talking about, whether it's using renewable energy or having decent composting pickup or whatever, that it's something that's accessible to all and affordable to all. In my community, we have curbside compost pickup. And I know that's pretty unusual in many places. I do live in the middle of a very big city. So, I don't think it's feasible in a rural area maybe, but I have 2 compost piles. One is the one I use in my backyard. And then in the city pickup compost, they give us bins and I can put in that pizza boxes, cardboard packaging that has food waste in it, meat or things that I wouldn't put in my backyard compost because I wouldn't want to attract rodents. But the city compost takes it somewhere where it gets really hot and all kinds of things get turned into mulch and compost and good stuff. But that's a systemic change that a community needs to do as a whole. It's not something any one of us can do all by ourselves, and nor should we, in the sense that, we might have the privilege or affluence to do some of those things by ourselves, but that it's ignoring the fact that most people either aren't going to be motivated or just do not have the time and money to do those extra things. So working on systemic change is a big part of the problem. A big part of how we're going to solve this problem is to make it easy and accessible for as many people as possible. So thanks to both of you for bringing up those examples.
I'd just like to add to that, if I may. We also in Austin have those composting bins. And I want to just acknowledge that I think we have come a long way just to even have those and to have recycling. We used to have that. And so I did see something again on Facebook last week and I've known about this, you can have trash composting where everything gets compressed. And so it's much less. And I had a friend who had one and I thought it was amazing and I should have one. And I've never got one. But, if the city gave everybody one of those, there would be much less in the landfill. And that's something that I want to explore more, to see how those really work and how much they cost. And yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know anything about that in terms of whether ecologically that makes more sense or less. It may be smaller in space, but it may be harder to compost something if it's compressed. I just don't know, but
Yeah,
it'd be
well,
worth
I don't
checking
know
that out. Yeah.
But I know the first person that I saw with it was very conscious.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine it was a good thing. But yeah, I'm going to explore that more.
Yeah. Yeah, another good example of where we should be working on systemic change regionally as opposed to just what we do personally is converting to renewable energy. That, some people put up solar panels on their house or they find other ways to go as green as possible, but most people can't afford to do that or don't have the means to do it. But if we required our utilities to transition to more renewables and you had an option of when you signed up with your electric company to choose that option, or your utility is just moving in that direction because of overall planning for that, we would all end up doing that. Because most people want to do that. They are more interested in being able to turn on the lights, not where the power comes from. And if they had a choice, they would go with renewables. But if it's not going to work, if we expect everyone individually to do that. There's all kinds of other reasons why it needs to be a systemic change. We need the infrastructure to support a transition like that. So just a few people doing it on their own isn't going to make it, but working in our communities to make this something in terms of overall infrastructure is the direction we need to go in. So thanks for thinking that, Heather. It sounds like you're really motivated to work on these concerns. So does anyone else have a story you'd like to share about environmental justice, about earth care in general? See if before we close, I want to see if somebody's just on the verge of sharing something. I don't want to cut you off.
I would just like to say I am woefully ignorant about earth care things. Our meeting has, we're a small meeting with a dozen or so people. And so, our meeting has people who are interested in different topics. Not everyone is interested in LGBTQ rights. Not everyone's interested in the death penalty. And as is this case with every meeting, and as is the case with every group of humans that meet together. And so my focus has been on other things. And so without going into too much detail, Pat Hirth, who's on this meeting, joined our meeting not terribly long ago, and has been championing earth care concerns since she walked in the front door. Well, long before then, but at least with our meeting. And so so the reason I'm here tonight is just to learn, because I think I have been focused almost solely on other issues, mental health issues and other issues. And so I've seen the odd documentary about environmental injustice, spraying pesticides on fields that are right next to housing units of people who don't have a lot of money and so forth. They can't go outside certain days or certain times of the day because they'll essentially poisons are being dropped from airplanes. And I've seen those kind of things, but on a local personal level, I have not spent a lot of time. So I do appreciate you being here and everyone for speaking up and sharing, because my eyes need to be opened. The more I learn, the more I need to learn. Thank you.
Well, certainly you bring up that when you start looking for examples of environmental justice or injustice, you'll see it. You just have to open your eyes to it, and you'll see it almost everywhere. In every situation, there's usually an imbalance and a disproportionate impact on some people compared to others. But I'm going to take this opportunity from what you said to encourage you all, if you're not getting the Quaker Earth Care Witness newsletter, to read it. If you want to learn more about earth care and you wanted to be inspired by what some folks are doing and just get some ideas for what you might do in your community. So I'm going to put that link in the chat again and invite you all, no cost, just sign up. And we put out a newsletter every quarter with stories about what folks are doing. And it's a range of topics from working with Indigenous communities on pipelines, like I was talking about, to natural landscaping, to, and everything in between. Just that the range of things that friends are doing on earth care is inspiring, and you'll find something that you'll be interested in and you'll be excited to know more about. I promise you that. So please sign up if you haven't already, because we love to share these stories and I hope it will be inspiring for you. So, anyone else have something you want to share before we close?
Well, yeah, I would like to say and emphasize the emphasis that systemic changes is required, no matter how much we do individually or small scale. Everything will come down to small scale, but it's got to be reinforced at the systemic level. I do some work at any rate, whatever some means, with FCNL, who is engaged in the systemic level. Also Citizens Climate Lobby, I do some stuff with. As far as environmental justice, I want to point out that there's a lot going on in environmental justice these days, well outside Quaker circles. I don't remember the exact title. I saw an advertisement for the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine on environmental justice, and it's not the only one that they have. The American Association for the Advancement of Science also does, and the IPCC reports, at least, when did I start reading it on them? This is 6. I know I looked at 5. I'm not sure how much I looked at the 4th assessment report. They all emphasize, and increasingly emphasize, equity and environmental justice and disadvantaged communities. There's a lot of people and organizations and groups that one could work with. Certainly be good within our Quaker circles, but there's lots of other folks around. And as far as personal stories, my profession was environmental toxicology for the last 20 years of my working life. And I could give you a number of, like, off the top of my head, 30 or 40 or 50 environmental justice issues from Guam to Limestone, Maine, and lots of places in between. So it's not all people of color or otherwise. Sometimes it's middle-class white folk as well. I'm not talking about the proportionality of who gets the bigger bad hand, but it's all over the place.
Thanks for bringing up all the different groups that are working with us. It's been, I would say, a growing area. Not that it's been with us all our lives, right? But that more and more people are aware of it and are trying to do something about the imbalance. But whoever it happens to, it's not good and it's not right. So thanks for telling us about those reports and about your work in the area. Thanks for that. It's great that you did that.
I'm a bit discouraged by your comments about the usefulness of the personal efforts that one can do. And I do appreciate the perspective at how privileged and affluent I am to be able to do the ones I was going to tell you about. The one systemic issue that I have been inspired to scheme about, but not found entry into, is sustainable development. And I just say that here in case there's anybody on the call can talk to me over the yearly meeting weekend to share how we can get our local government to require it. You know, I live in Houston, and they just give the land away to developers, and the amount of runoff being created by the paving and roofing of the entire landscape is really disheartened me.
Kevin, I'm sorry that I didn't mean to discourage you. I think it's really important for all of us who can to be examples in our community of what we can do. I just didn't want it to stop there, to understand that not everybody can do that. And it's important to make using renewables accessible to everyone. For instance, even though some of us may be able to do more now, before it becomes more affordable. It's already affordable in the general sense, but that's what I was really trying to suggest. Not that we shouldn't individually do what we can. I put solar panels on my house about, I don't know what it is now, 10, 12 years ago, something like that. And it was kind of a nutty thing to do at the time. It had there was a payback period, and financially it made sense in the long term. But now if you put solar panels on your house, the payback is, I don't know what, 3 or 4 years or something like that. I don't have the latest statistics, but it makes a whole lot more sense economically now to do it. The cost of panels has come way down. When I did it in part to be an example in my neighborhood, say you could do this too, you know, and you know, so it is important both for our own sense of integrity and to show what can be done, to take those steps individually if you're able to, but also to work for making it feasible for others who might not have a little extra money to put in, some capital to do some of these things. Right now I'm rewiring my house or adding some electric capacity so I could get rid of my gas hookups and convert to all electric. And I'm finding these huge roadblocks in being able to do it, both in terms of local, you know, how to get permission from the utility and the cost of redoing all this extra wiring in the house. And most people they're not going to want to spend that much money just to set up the local infrastructure in my house to be able to have a charging station to charge a long-range electric vehicle, and to put in an electric stove where I didn't have one, so I need to have a 220 line, all that, etc. I won't go into all the details, but it's costing quite a bit. And what would be even better, I'm going to do it anyway, again, in part as an example, but it is even better would be to have some kind of support from either at the state level or regionally or in our cities to help people convert to becoming all electric, to cut off the gas and to use renewables as much as possible. But so people are going to need help doing that. And we need to stop putting up roadblocks in our regulations that make it harder for people to do that. So that's what I mean about systemic versus personal change. I wouldn't want to discourage anyone from doing those household level changes, because you will inspire other people to do the same thing. And that's a good thing.
Well, you also get you'll get closer to the tipping point if people are doing it already. Yeah. And then it's like, well, then some politician can claim they did something and do a little bit to push it over the edge and get to where we're trying to go. Instead of making it hard with nobody doing it, going from 0 to 100 is going to be harder than going from 47 to 65.
Absolutely. And you know, there is that economies of scale. The more people who are seeking to do some of these things, it'll lower the price for everyone else. So it's still a good thing to do. It's just not the only part of the package. So thank you. Thanks for bringing it up. And I'm sorry if I was a little fuzzy about that or not as clear. Thank you.
One of the examples I think you're talking about, not about fossil fuel, but if you want to grow food in your front yard in Oklahoma City, 9 years ago, you couldn't without getting a code violation. So the community here got together and rewrote urban ag, a code for urban ag. And it took a lot of work and a lot of people and a lot of meetings with city council, but it did pass except for chickens. And so 9 years later, it comes, we bring it up again. And this year, without any trouble at all, I mean, several meetings, we had to go through the process, and there were two council people who voted against it, but it passed without all the ordeal that we'd gone through before. So there was progress.
Yeah, that's a great example. Thanks for sharing that with us. And yeah, that's the kind of thing where, yeah, there are regulations on all kinds of things that today might seem, why did they do that? I know in some communities you can't hang clothes on a clothesline because they think it's unsightly. So it's like, really? but yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Pat.
We have two friends that have sought a Houston city permit to allow them to grow something on their front yard instead of St. Augustine monoculture mowed to certain specifications to avoid getting a citation. It should be the other way around. You should file a permit to have to monoculture your yard and demand extra water to get it to look like everybody else's.
I like that. My neighbors have turned their front yard into like two big raised beds, and they're growing, kale and whatever else they're growing. I just think it's so beautiful to see, and it would be just delightful in my eyes to see mixed in with the flowers and ornamentals, some veggie gardens right up front. And but it's a change in thinking too, to go from imagining that every house needs to be uniform with a well manicured lawn relative to what are the other things we can do with that space.
I would remind folks that if you are participating in the commercial agricultural world rather than growing your own, which is not something everybody can do, that the Environmental Working Group annually puts out a list of the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, and the new list is just out at ewg.org. It's pretty interesting to learn that kale is the second most poisonous commercial product in the US. So if you want to eat kale, buy organic. It doesn't mean you can't have it. There are certain things that it makes more sense to work on organic than not. And especially for people with limited incomes, but some concern, it's not a bad place to start on personal consumption, rather than looking at maybe what other people are doing, that's even more egregious than what I'm doing. It's a help to look at one's personal consumption. And those patterns eventually may change the commercial production, slowly but surely.
Val, that list is
We just lost you, Bill.
yeah, sorry, is for pesticide residues and not other sorts of things. Is that not correct?
I also want to add that I had learned more recently that while the Dirty 12, that those lists are great and really good information, that those are vegetables as they are when you buy them, not accounting for once you rinse them off and then eat them. So some vegetables are much better about just being superficially dirty and have pesticides that do rinse off quite easily, and so you're not actually ingesting as much. I do realize that that doesn't mean they weren't used to make those products, but it's not necessarily meaning that all of them you ingest that much, for what that's worth.
I would not at all be surprised that they don't talk about that when they do their analysis. But maybe they would, they don't, I don't know. I have a good deal of confidence in their work, even though, you know, it's just one little drop in a big bucket.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to express my appreciation for you all stuck with this till the end, and you obviously are all very interested and concerned about these issues, and it's been great to hear a little of your stories. So anyway, I'd be happy to talk with any of you if you have any questions about what I'm doing, what QEW is doing. If you just want to share your story a little more, you can always contact me through our website. Be happy to talk more, and I'll put my email in the chat too. And just thank you for being here and for your concern.
Thank you very much, Nancy.